Hey, Honey Wash Day. Good morning, everyone. And as usual, we are right on time. Um, I want to thank everybody for the past 3 days, especially the workers that have helped put this together. Um, just so you know, we've had probably, 100 or so people in here, but we also have been averaging 100, 150 live views of this forum. So for those that are watching us, thank you very much for tuning in, and I hope you realize how important the native vote is throughout Indian country. We're going to have a short program today. One of the things that we've done different at this forum is we actually brought in our immersion students from Rosebud to participate not only in the honorings, but in the blessings and just to reinforce what this is all about. When it comes to Indian country, this is all about our culture, our tradition, our language, and our land. And when we talk about that, we can't turn around and say, that's it. We have to vote. Members of Congress are the ones that are supposed to abide and honor our treaties. And it's up to us using the ballot box to ensure that our treaties and our sovereignty are protected. It's up to us to go to Congress and have them honor those treaties that they signed. It's up to us to make sure that not only do they honor them, they also help provide the funding for them. We've already paid forward. You look at the oil, you look at the lands that we lost, we've paid forward for like ever. And as my wife Barb says, we gotta quit being a social service to this government. We've given them everything. We're running out of oil, we're running out of minerals, we're running out of land. And so we need to start fighting. Again, we don't need guns, we don't need bows. All we need is a pen and check mark in the ballot box. And that's how we're going to protect our sovereignty. So with that, also I wanted to thank Senator Schatz. He was here this morning. He spent a half hour with us. He listened to some of the concerns. He met our veterans, was able to talk to them. He said, we're looking at the boarding school legislation where we actually, the commission that's formed will have subpoena powers. He's been fighting for that hard, and now he's asking for Indian country's help in order to get that legislation for the Indian Boarding School Commission passed. The reason why that's so important, the Bureau of Indian Affairs and other agencies and organizations have tried to get documents to show what's going on with the boarding school lands that were taken, and they've met a stumbling block. And some of those papers, as we're talking, are finding its way to the shredder. And so we need to have this legislation passed so that we're able to have subpoena power through this commission to get to the truth. I mean, that's what this is all about. We're not asking for something pie in the sky. We're asking for the truth. And so I hope that people that are watching, tribal leaders, that you help us in getting hold of your congressional people and tell them how important it is that this legislation for the Indian Boarding School Commission gets passed. Okay, with that, I'd like to introduce our special speaker, Burton Warrenton. He's the president of Menominee U, Indigenous Language Restoration and Immersion. We thought this was really important because we, as a people, need to start bringing our language back. You can have land, but without that language, it's still not making us whole. So I hope you pay close attention to him, and those that are watching, heed his words, because we need to do everything we can to ensure that our children in the next 7 generations are able to make our culture stronger by knowing our language. So with that, Burton.
Yeah, good morning. So the mark of an educated mind is the ability to entertain a thought without accepting it. Again, the mark of an educated mind is the ability to entertain a thought without accepting it. And anytime that I speak publicly, I always like to start out with that quote. It's a quote attributed to Aristotle, but why I start out with that quote is as a kid, I was always encouraged to keep an open mind and to entertain a thought without accepting it. Is you don't have to accept everything somebody says, but if you keep an open mind and thinking about it, you can maybe take parts of it, maybe take pieces of it that's good, maybe you wholesale say it's a bunch of BS and you just disagree with it, but at least you keep an open mind and keep an open dialogue on it. I think that's really kind of relevant to what we're going through today with the the polarization in the political atmosphere, and couldn't agree more. We got to show up to vote, and hopefully at some point things get back to being a little bit more normal, whatever that means in politics. But Kshawn Kotnatakam, Kamamani Burton Warrington, Mokumane Nuishwan, Notna Katnup Kesawe, O Matno Manea Naniwak, Nakia, Netas, Potuao, Wayne Peko, No Apium, O Matno Manea Skonikan. So I'm Menominee on my dad's side and Potawatomi and Ho Chunk on my mother's side, but where I'm born and raised, where my roots started, were on the Menominee Reservation. That's home to me. That's who I am from an identity standpoint. That's where my roots are, where my story started. But why I'm here talking to you today, I started an organization back in 2020 called Menominee U, and I'm just going to share a little bit today about the story about how Menominee U came about and where I was at in my own life at the time. So, for background, I grew up, born and raised on a Menominee reservation, went out to Haskell University out in Lawrence, Kansas at 18. I don't remember filling out my FAFSA or anything. It was about 2 weeks before school started, and my mom and dad said, you're going to Kansas. And I filled out all my paperwork, so found myself down in Kansas, at 18 at Haskell. And my dad passed away my third semester in school, so I ended up taking a little bit of time off. But went back and finished up at Haskell University in 2006, went on to Kansas University for law school. Things moved pretty quickly for me. By 2010, I found myself up in the Assistant Secretary's office at the Department of Interior in the Obama administration. And with a lot of other good people in the administration, got an insight into what the inside of the federal government looked like. As I left the administration, I went back on my Prairie Band Potawatomi side, and I was the CEO of our non-gaming economic development portfolio. Built out a private equity portfolio for Prairie Band Potawatomi, and spent 5.5 years in that role, and then went back into practice and ended up as a partner in a law firm. And right around 2019, I was going through a lot of stuff personally. I wasn't really fulfilled with the things I was doing professionally, and so I was riding around with one of my close brothers at home in Kashina, and we were riding around in the woods, and I was kind of crying around to him. Like, I don't know what to do next, or I don't know what stuff I should do. And he asked me a question I didn't have an answer for. And he said, like, you can go out into the federal government, you can go run these corporations, you can be a lawyer, do all of these cool things. And he said, why aren't you doing language? And he said, imagine if you put all of those efforts behind the language, what would happen? And I didn't have a good answer for him, and it kept me up at night. I was thinking, like what if, have my own priorities and my own life shifted to where I'd rather do all of this cool stuff outside, and was that really feeding my spirit? And So after talking it over with my wife, I told told my brother, his name's Ron Korn. I said, well, if we're going to do this, buckle up, because we're going to do it right, because of the experience I got. We're going to take a little bit different approach at some of our language restoration and language revitalization. So we started this organization, Menominee U. You see the logo up there. It's very intentional. So Menominee, the way that it's officially spelt within the tribe is 2 E's at the end. The spelling of Menominee is indicative of our pre-termination spelling. And that was intentional because pre-termination, our language and culture was still heavily intact in the 1950s. Plus it also follows the adopted spelling system that we have. But the U part of it, Y-O-U, it has a double meaning. So on one hand, it means like we're not going to revitalize our language unless you, the community member, take control over it. So it's kind of similar to Uncle Sam saying, we need you, right? Same concept that we're not going to have community language revitalization without the community and without individuals in the community getting involved. And the second piece, why you see the actual letter U so big is that's, a U is a play on university, kind of a place of learning, right? And when we thought about it, we thought we don't need external validation for our own cultural learning. Like we learn every day. We don't just learn in an institution, but we learn throughout our entire lives in our community, ways of being. And our language, we learn naturally, all of us in the community. So that's the reason behind Menominee U's logo. So, it'd be preaching to the choir here, but, we all know that we had really terrible times in our recent history with our language, our culture, with the things that happened to us. But as an organization, we try not to ever play into this victim role, right? Like really bad stuff happened, and we're not going to allow the victimization of our people to be the narrative. Our resiliency is going to be the narrative. So, and another thing, looking at things in a more of a long arc of time. So, if you're not familiar with Menominee, Menominee is one of 2 tribes that's indigenous to what we now know as Wisconsin. So the Menominee creation story happened on the Menominee River, which is the border between Upper Michigan and Wisconsin, about 60 miles from our current reservation. And the glacier melt happened. The ice sheets came through. But we know our history is very long. Our creation story started there, and we can't really pinpoint a date and time and when that happened. But there is archaeological evidence that goes back about 14,500 years, and a lot of that was wiped out by the glaciers. So we don't really know how long Menominee have been here, but something we try to create a mental model is in 10,000 years, if you take 25 years as a generation, there's 400 generations of people, of ancestors. So whatever the Menominee creation story, if that's 10,000 years ago, 20,000 years, very, very long time. And when you start putting that in that context of 400 generations, for 396 generations, our language and culture was intact. It's only been the recent 4 generations that have actually experienced what we're dealing with today. So when you look at the long arc of time, there's a lot of ups and downs in our history. And shortly after Standing Rock in 2016, I was talking with Dave Archambault, who was the chairman at the time, and we got into talking about this long arc of time, and he said, what if our best days are ahead of us? Like, what if the best days aren't behind us? So, a lot of us will be like, man, like it was 1800, was 1694. But what was the pinnacle of Menominee's existence? And, it really challenges your thought process to say, what if the best days are ahead of us? And when our people have existed for this long in this place, we know there were peaks and valleys throughout our history. And What if we're just in a valley right now? And that's allowed us to control our own narrative about where we think our language is going to go. We're just in a valley today, and it's gonna peak again. That's our belief system. So, with the language revitalization in the community, yesterday was a really special day for us. It was the 98th birthday of our last remaining first language speaker from an unbroken line of speakers. The situation Menominey's in, there's one first language speaker alive that turned 98 yesterday, and we have a lot of second language speakers, but something that really has us excited is there's a 4-year-old girl at home that for all that we can see is another first language speaker of Menominee. Her parents were former program participants. They ended up having a kid, made a decision to move off the grid in a tiny home out in the woods and raise their daughter with only Menominee language exposure. So for all intent and purpose, this girl is first language Menominee before English. So we got between 98 years old and a 4-year-old. We have a lot of a gap in there. The family just had their second child last week, so that got us really excited because now there's going to be a child that's not just getting language from parents, but also from a sibling that's 4 years older than her, and we're really excited about that. But as we were looking at language revitalization, renormalization, we wanted to move beyond preservation, right? Preservation is that you're preserving it for some future use, right? When you're revitalizing, it's actually actively in practice. So Menominee U, that's what we work on, revitalization, renormalization. It should be normal for you to go into a gas station and hear two people talking Menominee. Right now, when you talk to somebody else in the store, everybody's head spins, and they look at you, and it's like something special. We don't want that to be something special. We want that to be the norm, that our language is alive and active every day in the community. So as Menominee U, we formed back in 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic, and we have this saying, like, what would our ancestors do? It's a question we ask ourselves a lot. So this pandemic was just a crazy time for all of us, unprecedented in our lifetimes. And in Menominee and in a lot of Algonquin culture, the winter time is a time when the teaching happens. It's when historically our people would have been isolated in smaller family groups, and they took that time to teach. So as everybody was home in the pandemic, we said, well, we got a captive audience. Everybody's at home. In the past, when people said, I'm not working on language because I don't have the time, well, now you have the time. You're at home. We had everybody was learning new terminology, Zoom. So we started out with some online language classes back in 2020. 2021, we got established. So we're a separate 501c3 that exists outside of the formal tribal government structure. But very much in lockstep with the tribal government, the Menominee tribal government, and working towards the same mission. But organizationally, we're a 501c3 outside of that. So somewhere in the middle of 2022, we didn't know if this thing was going to last. Maybe it was going to fizzle out the interest that we had in it. But we outgrew our physical space, so our board of directors challenged us to say, how do you solve this? How do you create your own physical space? 4 months later, we acquired 3.5 acres of land, got to work fundraising, and we opened our new language campus on August 1st of 2024. So just a couple months ago. Things happen really quick, and I'll get to talking more about that. I don't know how to click. One click. Yeah. So part of our promise to the community and to our fellow community members is if you want to be involved, there is space for you. So a lot of people in our community say, well, language isn't for me, there isn't any space for me there. But what you'll see on the top is all the way going from a supporter that's interested but not ready, to a beginning learner, to an intermediate learner, advanced learner, and a language practitioner. We have programming that matches up. There's something for everybody. So we want everybody involved, even if you're just a cheerleader, kind of supporting what we're doing, what the people are doing. But all the way into pure language practitioners, we have programming set up. So we know community-wide language revitalization can't happen without the community. Talked about our online language class. So in 2020, when we piloted our first online class, we did a 12-week class. We have 12 to 18 people on, and we ended up keep going with it for a year. So it said 12 to 18 people. Everybody wasn't there every week, but we got to the following fall, the fall of 2021, and we said it would be really cool if we had like 30 people sign up for class. We were doing 12 to 18. And the day that we opened up our registration, we had like 170 people, and we ended up with almost 260 people in the community that wanted online language class. There was only 2 of us, so we were like a little bit scrambling, trying to figure out how do we run class for that many people, but pulled it together. These numbers don't have 2024 numbers, but at this point we have almost 900 of our own tribal people, tribal community members that have taken online class with us. And a really cool feature you'll see on the map is Menominees are all over the place from relocation, from different reasons. So we have people all the way from Seattle. We have Menominees down in Florida, up in New York, California, and everywhere in between that are taking online language class, and this provides them a mechanism to be back connected in the community fabric of the community. So yeah, at this point, we got 3 classes we do, language 1, 2, and 3 online. And that's been a really, really interesting feeder for us. So I talked a little bit about, this first language speaker from an unbroken line of speakers, right? And one thing we push back on a lot is on linguists, because by and large, linguists have hijacked the narrative on our own tribal languages. They did very good work for us in the past, but you would have generally a non-tribal person come into the community, go find the best speakers in the community, and they would say, this is how everybody should talk. But what happens if aliens landed here and they met President Obama, who's a very articulate speaker, and if they said, well, Burton don't talk like President Obama, so he must not be fluent in English, right? So what linguists did, if they took the best of the best, in our case, it was a woman that was 80 years old in 1920, which means she was born in 1860 and was monolingual for the first 40 years of her life. Well, of course, Burton, as a second language speaker, isn't going to talk like her, just like a lot of people don't talk like President Obama or somebody that's a really, really articulate speaker, has a good vocabulary, delivers his speech in a certain way. So what that got us to thinking is, and realizing that there's levels to language. There's levels, there's domains of language, from how you would talk to somebody in a mechanic shop is very different than how you would talk at a public speech. And in the past, I've had people from home sitting in the audience when I'm doing a talk like this, and they're like, man, you sound different than you do when you're like in the community. So we start looking at language to say that there's levels of language, there's domains of language, and there's different facets of language between monologue. When you're controlling a narrative, like a speech like this, I can think about what I'm going to say, but it's a lot different if I'm having a debate and I'm having to think in real time in a dialogue. So we don't have a good metric system to measure this in our own speakers. So what you're seeing here is our functionality scale, is what we call it. So Well, what you're seeing is when somebody reaches what kind of similar analogy to like a martial arts is if you reach a black belt, we think there's 10 levels of fluency. Once you reach fluency, you can keep getting better and better and better. And most people in their lifetime will never reach a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's only a certain amount of people in English that reach that. We're also trying to figure out what is the path to pre-fluency, what are the markers. So what we're able to do, because Menominee was documented so much, is we're able to take a lot of different speakers and analyze their speech. How are they speaking? What quote-unquote mistakes are they making potentially? Or are they saying things in a very simplistic way when somebody else would say them in a very advanced way? And a lot of this was influenced by a study that was done on Algonquin language up in Canada. So this linguist went with a family. There were 5 generations of first language speakers, all the way from the great-great-grandma to the great-great-grandkids. So they go to this community event, participate in a community event, and when they get back home, the linguist sits down and asks each of them to tell the story of what happened. Well, naturally, the old lady tells it way more cool than the kid, but they all are first language speakers, and they all recount the story accurately. But word choice, usage of language, all of this was different. So it got us to say, it's not a either or. Either you talk like this woman that was in 1920, that was monolingual for most of her life, or you're just not worth anything, right? You're not a Menominee speaker. So what this system allows us to do is to help people understand where they're at, how are they speaking, what are their tendencies, and then ultimately how do they then level up to the next space. So if you think about it as your kids, kids speak in English. Most of our kids speak English, if not all of them. But our people, one of the observations, have adopted a lot of this negative stuff from boarding schools, some of the mean-spirited stuff, and some of our own people are really mean in language space, right? So, he's saying that wrong. Well, how many times do you ever tell your kid when they're learning English as a child acquiring a language? You don't sit there and yell at your kid for saying a word wrong. It's kind of cute, right? You laugh about it. You know that they're naturally going to fix it. But in our language space for a long time, we've taken on these tendencies of things that happen in boarding school, and a lot of our people are very mean about language acquisition. And when you don't have a welcoming environment, that pushes people away from you. So what we invoke at Menominee U is a speaker-friendly environment. And we have a saying, we'd rather hear it wrong in Menominee than right in English. So that allows people the ability to say, I don't have to be a perfect speaker. It's okay for me to be on my learning journey. And that's really empowered a lot of people that otherwise wouldn't have come in to then now come in. And if they make mistakes, they make mistakes. Not doing it intentionally. They're trying to get better, but we're going to support them as they're going through their own language acquisition. So I'm going to get back to this functionality thing. So as I mentioned before, we got one first language speaker remaining. When we started this in 2020, at the start of the pandemic, we had 4. So we lost 3 of our first language speakers during the pandemic. So we were down to 1. Again, she turned 98 yesterday. And when we started this in 2020, what we thought that was functionally fluent was less than 10 people in Menominee. That's 4 first language speakers and 6 second language speakers. Our goal in Menominee Youth Language Revitalization is by 2045, we want 10% of our local population, which is 234 people, to be functionally fluent in our language. So, it's a 25-year vision that we have. It's 25-year strategic plan that we're implementing there. But that's our target, is we want 10% of our local adult population to be functionally fluent. We also have a lot of investment by the tribe in immersion schools, our immersion daycare, charter school that's kind of bilingual / immersion. But one of the problems is we know those are important, but we know those can't be the only tool to language revitalization as a school, because a kid at best is spending seven hours a day, 5 days a week through whatever the school year is. But what happens when that kid walks out and turns on the TV and it's all in English? What happens when they go to the store and see all the other Menominee people speaking English? That kid isn't going to mature into a full speaker because of their surrounding environment. So part of the strategy of this long-term community revitalization is we want adults in the community speaking, so when these kids come into the community, they know it's all right to speak, and they're comfortable speaking, and that they have better language models in the community. So that's where we're headed from a language revitalization standpoint. So the big question, how do we get there, right? How do you get to 10% of your adult population becoming functionally fluent? We think our online program could take people from this light blue, which is just somebody that's interested, all the way up to a yellow belt. And the thing with this whole system, it's not meant to be a hierarchy. So you'll see these logos, we have different colors in them, so you know what another speaker's level is. But it's your responsibility, if you're a black belt, not to go in and karate chop the heck out of a yellow belt, right? You don't go in and start talking over their head. You're able to talk to their level with the support that you understand that they're in their journey somewhere. So when you're at an event and you see all of these people, you maybe say, hey, there's a black belt, like they're a good language model for me, right? You know who to talk to. Whereas if you see somebody that's 1 or 2 ahead of you on these, you maybe know that you're still getting mistakes from them, or developing speech. But again, it's not meant to be a hierarchy, it's just meant to be able to identify where people are at, so you can then talk to the level that makes sense to them. So we think the online programs can get people to like this yellow belt. We have a Menominee Lifeways Institute that we do at the campus that started in August. We're on day 52, and I just had like a 7-minute conversation with a kid that's been in the program for 52 days. Pretty exciting. Naturally, they're making tons of mistakes. Like I was talking to a 4-year-old kid. They're not using full sentences. They're leaving out key information. They may be making mistakes, but fully understood, just like your kid would be talking English. So, you know, we in a speaker-friendly environment, if somebody says something wrong, we don't correct them. We don't say, hey, you're saying that wrong, you're pronouncing it funny, you know, you sound like you're Mokumon. What we do is we'll find a way to relay that thought back to them using the language in its proper form. So, you know, whatever you respond back to them, maybe you'll find the word that they used wrong, and you'll make it relevant to the conversation. So now they start having a mental model of hearing it back again. So this Menominee Lifeways Institute, we think will take people a brown belt, and then apprentice program is what we think gets people into a black belt. After that, we don't think there's programming that's going to take a person from a 1st degree fluency up to a 10th degree fluency. We think that's lived experience, that's talking the language every day, that's potentially working in the language every day, and that takes time. And like I said, most of our people, what we think is they're never going to get past a fifth degree, but at 5th degree of fluency, you can do everything. It's just you may not articulate, you may not convince people to take up a cause, like maybe you're not a passionate enough speaker, maybe you're not one of our speakers in our ceremonial societies, but most people were probably functioning at that level when we had monologues and our monolingual people in our community. So that's part of our crazy plan. Again, here a linear chart. We know it's not going to happen like this, but there it is in. These are the people we're running through our programs. So we, our full-time programs, we run 2 different programs. The first is called Menominee Lifeways Institute, and what we do is we give people the space to live like a Menominee should for 12 months. So we have a 13 moon cycle in our cultural calendar, and it tells you everything you should be doing year round. And what we call that is Indian law, Menominee law. It's the things we are instructed to do. It's not written on a piece of paper. It's not recognized by a court. These are your obligations to our environment and to our culture. So, you know, things, when we started in August, like our raspberries were right at the end of harvest, and then our blackberries became ripe, our blueberries became ripe. And there were people that in their early 20s that lived on the reservation their whole life, and they said, like, we never knew we had blueberries up here. That just had never been out in the woods, right? You take it for granted. When you got 250,000 acres of one of the most biodiverse forest in the entire Midwest, which is Menominee. So then we you know, slowly thereafter start harvesting all the crops. We get out wild ricing. There's about half of our people in our programming have never went wild ricing before. Menominee literally translates to the people of the wild rice, and we have people, one that was a 50-year-old that came with us that never actually wild riced from the wild rice people, right? But what we try to do is not culturally shame people. Like, some people just haven't had the experience, and it's never too late for them to reconnect with these things. And we really try to deal with this cultural shame, just like not knowing your language. It's like the little kid that comes in your house that's hungry, and you say, do you want something to eat? And they say no because they're too proud. So we face this in our community a lot, is we have people that you know, maybe have not wild riced before, and they're embarrassed of it, right? They have cultural shame. No fault of their own. It's what's happened in the community, but we try to help support them to say it's all right. A lot of us haven't done everything that we should, and if we change that dynamic, our next generation is going to grow up with these things normalized, just like our language. So, you know, we think there's going to be about 200. We think we're going to produce about 200 of what we consider a black belt fluent speaker by 2045. And this is what we're doing within our community campus. Again, when we look at things through the lens of an arc of time, our language didn't get into the situation that it's in today overnight. There's not going to be a 1-year grant. There's not going to be a 2-year grant. There's not going to be a 5-year grant. These things are going to take generational change. And one of the cool things about being in this long arc of time is my ancestors 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 generations before made decisions that impact me today. We're trying to do what we can to put our kids and our grandkids and our great-grandkids in a better position than we are. And that's what it means as an Indigenous person to be in this arc of time, right? We're a small speck and in a very long story that happened before us and that's going to happen after us. So we think the changes we're making today are going to put our kids in positions that we weren't, and we do think our best days are ahead of us. So we get to the language campus. As I mentioned, we opened a $5.2 million language campus in August. Really interesting feature of it, and is we don't have a dollar of federal, tribal, or state money in this $5.2 million center. 100% philanthropic. And it's not because we don't have the tribe's support. We have the tribe's full support, but the tribe has tons of obligations, from public safety to healthcare, all these other things. Is we didn't want to take existing scarce resources and redirect them. We said, how do we be additive to the community? At $5.2 million, to a lot of people, that's not a huge accomplishment. To us, it's the single largest investment in our reservation's 170-year history that isn't government. There's no private equity coming into our reservation. There's no private money coming in to invest in our reservation. Everything's either under the county or the state or the tribe, right? So, you know, it was pretty interesting when we were building it because our reservation isn't set up to welcome outside development, right? We have to lay our own sewer pipes and go connect with the tribe's sewer down the road. There's just tons of things, like our county is very small. They don't do this development, so we're like walking through it in lockstep with them, holding hands. But yeah, what you're seeing here, this is the aerial view of it. In the back of the building, we have the two classrooms, and the bigger of the two classrooms are our first-year program. That's at Menominee Lifeways Institute. The middle area is like a commons, and then the other side's our second-year apprentice program. We have these doors that open up, so we have one big space in the back, which we can do multiple larger community events. We have the technology rooms in there to be able to we kind of call them the confession booths, but if anybody remembers Real World, when you go in and you give your reflection of the week. So we do that with our program participants, and the reason why is week one, they're just giving their feedback mostly in English. At this point, it's been really cool because they're starting to get to about 30% of their weekly reflection, 5 to 7 minutes is in Menominee. And you now have a metric to say what is their speaking pattern, because they've gotten comfortable speaking, where it's not a test. We're really just trying to see how are they developing. So they go in there and do their weekly reflections. We do a lot of media stuff, news channels. We do a lot of stuff on YouTube, different kind of just messing around stuff. But we have a studio set up in the office, conference room, kitchen, because Indians always like eating. And then we got adequate office space for ourselves now. So 10,000 square foot facility that we have opened up. You want to cue up the video? Yeah, I'll show you guys a video walkthrough of the facility. Yeah, so had about 2.5-minute videos, but it'll give you a sense of the facility we opened. Yes, we can fit about 200 people in the back of this space, and then again, those partition walls closed, so we're in three different conference centers. Got full technology built in there. We got about $130,000 worth of audio visual in there. It's a 137-inch screen there. Full ability to teach online, where the cameras follow us around. Kind of went all out in our development of the building. But again, not a dollar of tribal, federal, or state money in this facility, which we're pretty proud of, bringing that new money into the community. It's a brand new $38 million high school that just opened across the road too, so it's pretty cool because the high school kids see us every single day, and a lot of them walk across the street to us every day, which is pretty cool. Yeah, we got, that's our auntie's room. We just carry stuff in there and she kicks us out. We're not allowed in the kitchen, but she's, yeah, we got a lot of our elder ladies take a lot of pride in taking care of the community, so they're we're feeding a lot, eating a lot in there, and doing it through the means of the language. And another thing we realize is we're not living this cultural life, cultural kind of spiritual stuff like every single day, day in, day out. So, when we talk about what should a Menominee be doing in 2024, probably vastly different than a Menominee in 1924. And those 1924 Menominees were very different than 1824 Menominees. Those 1824 Menominees were very different than 1724 Menominees. So you kind of have to deal with the life. We have all of this around us every day that we're involved in. So we know if our language doesn't move forward and evolve into the spaces that we're at, we're not going to change the spaces. So, we do a lot of modern things, like Tuesday night we play sports leagues. We got cornhole leagues, and we're trying to do these things that people do in their lives anyway. Our ultimate goal is to say, well, we're not asking people to change their life. Do what you do in your life anyway, and we're going to give you the opportunity to do that in the language. So it's in a nutshell what we're working on. It comes down to a pretty basic concept that we have in our heads. Is people will say, it's an awesome job that you guys are trying to save the language. We actually believe the opposite. We believe the language is trying to save us. So that's all I have today for this part. Happy to talk with anybody. There's tons of stuff we're doing. To work on things. We're taking a lot of data approach. Came out through the Harrah's gaming system, so no database marketing. These are all these things when I told my buddy to buckle up, because we're going to do it right. So the analytics that we're doing, the things that we're doing in that sense are highly informed, and in our community engagement, how we're engaging such a large portion of our community, it's all because of marketing background and having spent time in corporate world and doing marketing and things of that nature. So we're putting it all behind the language, but again, we know that this is generational work. Don't know how long I'm going to be in it, but and I know where our kids and our grandkids are going to be in a lot better position than we are today. So let's finish with that, and appreciate everybody's time.
Thank you for that, Burton. I hope, again, people here and people that are watching online, to get his name down, find out how to contact him. What he's doing is really vital, and I like what he said. They're not doing this to save the language. The language is doing that to save us. So I thought that was right on the money. Before we start the next program, I want to let everybody know that there was a Navajo code talker that died at the age of 107. And his name is John Kinsel, Sr. And, we're talking about language, we're talking about, our culture. 107 Navajo code talker is kind of like what Burton was talking about. The amount of language that you actually learn and over the years. So what I'd like to do is take a moment of silence in honor of Mr. Kinsel. Thank you. The next thing on the agenda, and you know, like I said, I've been at this for, I think, too long. But one of the things that, as we started getting out the vote and doing, you know, what we do best is to ensure that our people are given equality. And so I reached out to a real good friend of mine in Indian country, to Dr. Sherdal. And as we get going, I'll tell you how we lured her into this. But the next one is going to be an academic study on Indian country, the importance of expert witnesses, felony disenfranchisement, conflicts between state law and administration, litigation in state courts using state laws and constitutions. So if I could have Dr. Dietrich, Dr. Proven, and I'm going to make Ed a doctor. Dr. Ed Harrington, and of course, my friend, Dr. Professor Gene Sherdal. I pity them because I'm moderating this. And the reason I get to moderate it, I'm actually an alumni of the Claremont Graduate University. I have an honorary doctorate there. Thank you. And it wasn't because of my language. No. So with that, you know, like I said, we've been at this a very, very long time. We started back in you know, before we became Four Directions, we started for doing school boards. And then we graduated, we did Senator Tim Johnson's. There's the lady that actually handled Senator Tim Johnson's election, Barbara, my wife and co-executive director of Four Directions. And what we saw when we were doing this, our goal was to get people to vote. I mean, to me, it was real easy. Just get them there to vote. And then we saw how it wasn't that easy. It was easy for non-Indians that lived off reservations to vote, you know, and we'd hear, oh, geez, Indians aren't really involved in state and federal elections. Well, of course not. We didn't have the opportunity to do it. And once we found out what was going on, we started looking at different ways in order to close that gap. And one of the first problems we ran into, there was no experts on native voting. And then one day, Dr. Sherdal got a call from a tribal leader from San Manuel. And he said, hey, do you know anybody that does this and that? And I don't know the whole story, but all of a sudden she got of our COO, Brett Healy, and she's going to ask him some questions. Oh, you don't need to ask. We'll show you how to do it. And she became our very first expert witness in Indian country. and she went through Rosebud, went through Oglala, went through the different reservations there. We actually did surveys in South Dakota and in Nevada and I believe Arizona, right? But once Jean got her hooks into how unfair it was. She became Indian Country's champion on ensuring that we had friends that had the technical and physical knowledge of how that we could combat this. So I talked enough. I'm only a moderator. So with that, I would like to start out with, who do you want to start with? All right. And, oh, by the way, then we lured Joe in. So we have actually a working relationship for what, about 10 years or more? So, all right, Joe, go ahead.
Are these, okay, there we go. So what I was charged with today to talk a little bit about was the idea of what an expert when you're pursuing these, not just voting right cases, but there's civil rights cases. And to put it succinctly, and to steal OJ's joke, it's about which set of white people with PhDs the court's gonna believe. And so, I mean, to put it succinctly, in the end, it comes down to which series of experts, assuming that the court is balanced in its consideration, assuming that it's not searching for some outcome it already prefers, it's going to come down to which set of data, which set of academics make a more provable point. And that means you have really what you're looking for is kind of three different things in an expert witness. You're looking at someone who's credentialed, somebody who has the academic degrees that the court's going to respect, somebody who can work with the advocates, who can work with the activists on the ground. Would it be better to have them testify in court because they know what's going on? Absolutely. But the court is going to respect the degrees that go along with it, and that gives them that credibility. So the credentials become the first thing. Second, has to be somebody you trust, somebody who you know is going to be working on your behalf, somebody who you know through a built-up relationship over years, like Gene and OJ, and I guess now me a little bit. We've been working on these issues in different directions. We're going to talk a little bit here about some of the work on voting equity. We're going to also talk a little bit. Edward's going to talk a little bit about felony disenfranchisement, and these are all projects that could at some point result in affidavits and in testimony that will help court cases all across Indian country. So it's got to be somebody you trust, somebody you know who you can rely on. Third, somebody who can effectively communicate with the court. It's got to be somebody who's used to presenting this kind of material, somebody who can break it down quickly and get the points across to the court, quickly, accurately, decisively summarize the findings. The court's not going to take a lot of time. The lawyers are not going to open up a lot of time to really discuss these things. They'll be presented in an affidavit to the court. The court will read it as part of the evidence, and that's really how this gets done. That leads me to a little bit of just conversation about when I worked as an expert witness on a case in Arizona. I was happy to do it. And I should also point out that I think it's important to hire somebody with integrity to be an expert witness. You can hire hired guns. There are people who will present whatever you need them to present for a check. But I think that's maybe a wrong move. You want somebody who's got that integrity, who's truthful with their facts. It lends to the credibility of their statements to the court. And I think a credible witness backed with defensible facts is a witness who's harder for the other side to impeach. So you're looking for somebody on that, who has that level of integrity. It's also not a bad idea to hire somebody early, to bring an expert witness in early when you have these kind of cases, because they can help work with the legal team to help craft some of the questions that the affidavit might be answering, or some of the things that get presented to the court. The lawyers don't necessarily know all the contours and nuances of what the data can provide. That's what academics do. So bringing in an academic early, bringing in somebody who can then later be the expert witness, it can be integral in making sure that the things you need presented are presented to the court. And this is actually part of my experience with testifying in Arizona. Is I was brought in very late. I had 3 days to prepare data. The other side had a month and a half. So I had to figure out how am I going to demonstrate that the loss of a reservation polling place was going to damage the ability of this tribe and their access to the vote. And it was interesting because I figured it out. I figured out a way to show that it would increase travel time, it would increase monetary costs, it would increase fuel costs, it would, and the move resulted in whiter parts of the city having better access than tribal, and actually, just as a side consequence, not just for the native tribes, but also Latinos who lived in the same area of the city lost access too. So it didn't just hurt one group, it hurt multiple groups. I figured this all out. And I figured, I came armed and prepared to testify into all this, and nobody asked me a single question about any of the data I was presenting. What they asked me about were my credentials. Are you a this? Are you a that? Are you a demographer? Are you a population expert? Are you a this? Are you a that? Have you read the statutes? Do you know what statute 16 is? Do you know what this is? And what I came to realize quickly into this is that what they were trying to do was not impeach the work that I had done. They weren't questioning the work. They weren't questioning the data. What they were questioning was me and my credentials and my integrity and and whether or not I actually knew what I was talking about. Which was difficult because I'm an academic. I like to argue. I like to make the debate and the point. I come with facts, and we're going to prove we're going to prove what's right. But that really wasn't what the expert witness was, and that leads me to my last point about an expert witness. You want somebody who can think on their feet. You want somebody who can, when they're challenged about who they are, about their academic chops, about their credentials, they don't get insulted. They let it roll off and explain, well, this is who I am and this is why I was called. And that's, I think that's probably the last critical skill you're looking for. It's, like I said, it was left to the judge to consider the affidavit, which I had prepared in advance and presented to the court, as had the other side. Neither group of expert witnesses were really asked anything about the data, anything about the impact, anything about all of that. It was left for the judge to just read it in the affidavit, which again brings me to my point that it came down to which set of facts were presented more compellingly. Who wrote a better affidavit? Who was better at communicating succinctly? And so that's, I think there's deep value in having your expert witness, but you want somebody who knows that data. What we're going to present, actually what Tessa's going to present and what Edward's going to present, are some of the data that we're working on and kind of how we create that and how we've been working on that. So which one of you wants to go next? Tessa?
Sure, just pass it off to me. Halito, hello, my name is Tessa Provins. I was brought in to this project by Jean and Joe a couple of years ago now that we've been working on this, and it's been very enlightening, to say the least. Just as a quick, I'm an assistant professor in the School of Government and Public Policy at the University of Arizona, and when Joe's talking about this, like collecting data, I'm going to talk a bit about some of the features of electoral equity, how easy it is to vote for everybody in a given place, and talk about some of the scores that we've been been working on at the county level for this. And I'm going to discuss a little bit about how we make these scores, why they're important, and then more, I think importantly, how people that are researchers, how tribes, how election practitioners and activists can actually use these scores in court cases, and also in helping give back some knowledge to the communities and activate people to vote, hopefully. Now, electoral access is largely dictated by the local level, more specifically at the county level. In other words, state and local actors are going to dictate how easy it is for individual people to vote. And electoral equity in the US election system is becoming increasingly divided. In some places, they're working really hard to lower barriers to voting, making it easier to vote. And other places are making it harder for people to vote, and much harder in many cases to vote. And most of the existing research on this has been really trying to look at the state level, but what we've found out recently in the work that we're doing is that this is actually largely driven at the local level by local election officials. And when we think about it, the structure of the US electoral system has made up of multiple layers. But when we look at this, the election administration is oftentimes differing at the state level and at the local level. And the differences in this is there's state laws, things like voter ID laws, or local norms and funding that's sort of driving how easy it is for someone to be able to vote. When we look at this, at the state level, there's considerable variation in things like being, like having funding, the degrees of autonomy that they give local governments in order to be able to vote. And when we start looking at the local level, at these local election officials, they're oftentimes responsible for things that, if you've gone out and voted, directly impact you. Maintaining voter registration. They decide how voter registration is processed, and how aggressively they pursue maintaining those voter registration lists. They also encourage on the flip side, voter registration by organizing drives, promoting online registration, making it easier and more accessible. The number and placement of polling places, something that's crucial for access and something that's been part of these court cases, is the number of polling places, and local election officials are oftentimes deciding where these polling places are located. They have to consider things like geography, population density, and accessibility, and so poor decisions about where to put these polling places can dramatically impact communities of color, low-income voters, and it really leads to voter suppression. The local election officials are also making decisions about early voting periods, procedures associated with voting that can be really impactful. They can, the way that voter ID laws, which are dictated at the state, can vary pretty widely, because even if voter ID laws are set at the state, local officials determine how strictly that they're applied. And this can be important. Local election officials are responsible for ensuring the integrity of voting machines, ballot design, overall election security. Poll workers play such an important role in thinking about people's access to voting, but also the experience of voting itself. So when you have local election officials that are responsible for training, they can determine whether or not poll workers are knowledgeable about voting rights, how to handle long lines, whether they can assist voters if they need help. And that's a really important aspect of this. And local election officials can also increase voter access by actively promoting voter education, informing citizens about their voting rights, important deadlines, the logistics of elections themselves. And so, as we thought about this, then how do we measure electoral equity? And it's not just, as we found out, this state level aspect, but this local level aspect. And so Jean and Joe and our other partner, Brett, OJ, our other partner who is not here today, Melissa Rogers at Claremont Graduate, started brainstorming. Right? How do we get all of these components that are so important to local elections and how people are getting access to vote? And so came out MOVE, which is our fancy name for what we've been measuring. And so what we're interested in is this electoral equity in measuring this. Now, there's 3,143 counties in the United States, and the data collection for this has been difficult. So Joe's going, we have 350 counties. We're being helped by an army of undergraduates that are helping us collect this data. We have to train them to go through and find data at the county level for every single one of these over 3,000 counties in the United States to create these scores. And we started off with like 50 metrics, of which when we were training them, they were like, all 50? Yes. Stop it. 250 submetrics, but there's so many components to this. We've narrowed this down a bit as we've found data in the collection process and refined the measure itself. But a few of the things that I mentioned were so important for local officials. We've actually found ways to systematically measure in these voter equity scores. So things like registration information, voting information, registered voter information, registration drives, ease of registration, availability of poll workers, drop boxes in voting centers, standard mail service. Joe and Jean and Melissa have been doing a lot of work on voter access via mail, post office locations. And we also include some state level variables like state support for elections, things like funding, support for equipment, and then also some of the socioeconomic and sociodemographic variables that are associated with different states at the county level. And all of this we've put into these metrics and collected this data on each of these counties to see what places have the most electoral equity. We've collected a number of states, and what we're finding is that this varies not only by state about how much access there is, but by county as well. So looking at this, right, we're in Wisconsin. We recently have collected and analyzed the Wisconsin data, and what we found is that there's very low, there's difficulty in voter access. So when we talk about voter equity or voter access, it's the cost of voting or how hard it is to vote. Things like, how hard was it to get that information? How hard is it to get there? And what we found is in Wisconsin, that it is quite difficult as compared to other places, particularly for Native communities. And so using these scores moving forward, what we're interested in doing is being able to use these as an opportunity and as evidence, right, that Native communities are being disproportionately impacted by electoral and having access to electoral equity. And so this is one of the things that we're seeing is that one of the lowest ranked counties for our scores is Jackson County in Wisconsin here, which has a larger Native population. One of the things that's very interesting is that we've been able to collect data for Arizona, which has largely rural Native populations, and then Wisconsin, which has much more urban Native populations. And so this is really important for us because we're seeing that in both cases, right, that individuals that are trying to get access to vote are actually having quite a difficult time. And how do we change this, right? How do we turn these scores into ways that to give information to people so that we can really get people out to the polls? So with that, just bear with me for one more second, please. And then I promise I'll quit talking because Joe's going to push me off at some point. We really want to, like we've said, we've collected over 300 counties. There's 3,000. We're hoping by the end of the year that we'll have about 30% of the U.S. covered, which is quite the feat. And our RAs are screaming and crying, but happily, but they're getting paid and they're happily doing the work.
If anybody wants to add money to help pay for it, please note, it doesn't drop from the sky.
Gene would like money. We will, for the scores, we would all like to be able to continue to pay RAs to do this. Because they work really hard. This is not easy data to collect. I think that's one of the things is that, we have weekly meetings with our RAs, and we're sorting through data. They're looking at people's Facebook pages. They're calling county election officials. Sometimes they're nice, sometimes they're not. One of the metrics that we don't cover, which was really interesting, is how welcoming they are. And some of my students come in and they're like, I don't think I've ever been spoken to like that before. And I'm like, well, keep calling, but it'll get worse. But also, right, that some people are just extremely helpful and really, really want to get people the information to voting. And that is the case for Joe saying most, and it really is the case that people really have been open to answering questions most of the time and really helping us figure out how much information is out there for voters to be able to access. So we want to expand this data. As Jean mentioned, right, funding is really important for us to be able to do this so that we can keep sort of collecting this data and being able to make it available to people and make it publicly available. And some of the future work that we want to do really is making sure that we can see how this impacts people across Indian country, but also other groups as well, because there's a lot of people that don't have access to voting, or that they've made it a lot harder to make voting a lot more costly. And so how do we lower those barriers? Who's being affected by that? So Koki, thank you for your time, and I'm going to pass this off to Edward. You don't want my mic? Okay.
Magic mic, that's a different presentation for those in the know. My name is Edward Headington. I'm a second-year PhD student. Despite my promotion from my honorary doctorate to my right, I'm excited to be here. This is my second swing state I've been a part of as part of Four Directions Native Vote Forum, and I joined a team over the summer to do some survey research on the Rosebud Reservation. So I'm excited to be here. And in academia, we were always looking for phenomenons of interest, looking for ways to contribute, and ask ourselves, why is this important, and what can I possibly do that's different, that's already been done? And a lot of times there's a gap in the research, or we're applying fresh eyes to an old issue. And when it comes to some Native American issues or issues affecting Indian country, there's not just a gap in the literature, but there's a wide chasm. And so as an aspiring PhD, it's exciting to be involved, to be invited into this space, and just wanted to note that before we started. The issue, or the topic, is on felony disenfranchisement. That's one of those. What? Oh, I'm fine sitting, it's okay. If you don't mind me, I may have to put my glasses on, but felony disenfranchisement among Native Americans. And this might have been noted by some of the speakers, so this is our third day, that in terms of the electoral map and the importance of Native American voting rights, here in a swing state like Wisconsin, Trump beat Clinton by less than 1%, so 22,748 votes helped put him in the White House. In 2020, Biden beat Trump by even a less percentage than Trump beat Clinton, by 6,802 votes, or 0.63% margin. So as we talk about this subject, I just want to remind you of the low percentage of victory, and that there are 71,000 Native voters in Wisconsin, according to the Green Bay Press Gazette. And last year it was reported that there are 63,000 residents in 2023 that were barred from voting due to Wisconsin's felony disenfranchisement laws. So bear that in mind, that this isn't just an issue for academics, but it's an issue that could very well decide the outcome of this little election we're having in about 3 weeks. It's not a dramatic pause, I'm trying to turn the page. So I'm going to talk a little about the roadmap. So Native Americans have high incarceration. Well, I should note that I'm presenting research that has been done by Drs. Melissa Rogers, by Joseph Dietrich to my left, and of course Dr. Schrodel. So anything I'm saying here, they have the deep facts they can provide. But, and me. Native Americans have high incarceration and felony conviction rates, subjecting them to frequent felony disenfranchisement. And states with large Native populations are more likely to have strict felony disenfranchisement laws. This also includes things like second-generation voter discrimination. Native Americans are the only group for whom felonies are likely to be adjudicated by the federal government, including in Arizona. And that also results in longer periods of disenfranchisement, and especially in terms of no parole being offered at the federal level, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Felony disenfranchisement laws disenfranchise even after sentences are complete, whether by statute or by creating confusion and hurdles. Now, how does this work? So it does vary by state, so key details matter. So can rights be restored? Well, it depends. Who restores them? Is it automatic after you complete your sentence? Is it after you finish probation? Is it after supervision? Do you have to go to judge to get a pardon? So it varies greatly by state. And at what point does it become restored? Do you have to pay fees? Again, do you have to get a pardon? Logistically, the Secretary of State's office pulls a list of felony convictions at some interval and matches it against their database. And this is all very confusing, especially at what stage a felon could, again, regain the right to vote. Now, in terms of Wisconsin, since we're here, Wisconsin's one of the 5 public law 280 states, or mandatory states, that gives extensive criminal and civil jurisdiction over tribal lands. This is the point where I put my reading glasses on. So they have criminal jurisdiction over all Indian country land except on the Menominee, am I saying that? Menominee Reservation. There are disparities in high incarceration rates that disproportionately impact people of color. So Native Americans make up about 0.7% of Wisconsin's population, but are 11 times more likely to be in prison than white residents. In 2015, Native Americans were incarcerated at a rate of 1,421 for every 100,000 residents. These are between the ages of 15 and 64. The rate for blacks were 1,445, but for whites it was only 210. And these are according to the Vera Institute of Justice. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the federal role in disenfranchisement. Felonies committed by Native Americans on reservations are the purview of the federal government in most states, including Arizona. The felony disenfranchisement thus interacts with a jurisdictional jungle of federal, state, and tribal criminal justice alongside the state and county alongside the state and county elections administration officials. The role of federal government results in greater disenfranchisement because, one, federal sentencing requirements, especially minimums, leads to longer sentences, no federal parole, and thus longer time without legal voting. And two, there's ambiguity around whether felons are legally able, discourages them from voting in an already low propensity voting group. We doing okay on time? Yeah. So what's the difference between states and feds? Well, sentencing guidelines have resulted from '84 to 2005 in longer sentences, which ended with U.S. versus Booker. There's mandatory minimums that result in longer sentences than do when it's a state felony. There's no parole, there's high declination, high administrative closure for Indian country cases, and there's high absentee rates for victims and witnesses. Now, what are the implications? Well, there's longer disenfranchisement. So sentencing by the federal government results in longer sentences, more charges, no parole, all of which keep you from voting for longer. Native American defendants are low priority from the AUSAs or U.S. Attorney line prosecutors, likely resulting in lower quality justice, not just for victims, but also the defendants. Once a felon's longer sentence is complete, how to restore the right to vote is somewhat ambiguous because it doesn't align with the state process. So if you're a felon, what would you think? It's probably one of your least concerns. It's already difficult for Native Americans who live on reservations to vote in general. So these disenfranchisement laws make it a low priority activity into a no priority activity, because the risk of punishment for voting is not even close to being worth it. And there's all this ambiguity that makes, given the greater, or all ambiguity is all the more greater given the federal role. So with that, let me give the mic back for the closer.
All right.
I get the magic mic. Wow. Okay, everyone here at some time, I'm sure, has been a student in a class. Yes? You can nod. Yeah. Audience participation, thank you. And you've often thought that teacher or that faculty member, do they pay any attention to me? Nah, probably not. Well, I'm here to tell you the fact that we are here, all of this group except for OJ, are here because of one student. About 15 years ago, roughly, there was a man named Darren Marquez. Some of you may have encountered Darren. Darren used to be the chair of the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians. Darren was a student in my class. And he came up to me, said, "You do American politics. How come you're not doing anything in Indian country and the difficulties that we have voting?" I'm sitting there going, gosh, I never thought of this. I sort of had thought with Darren's last name, maybe he was Hispanic. Okay. Ooh, I've blown it. So I started doing a little bit of looking. But I wasn't thinking that this was going to change my life and a bunch of other folks' lives. But unbeknownst to me, Darren turned around and mentioned me, and I didn't know at that time that Indian country is like a small town where everybody knows everybody or knows somebody who knows everybody. So Darren mentioned to someone, "Hey, I've got this professor who can do this stuff." Ha. And then I got a call, and it wasn't from OJ, it was from Brett. And most of you, I'm sure, know Brett Healy. And this was January 2014, almost 11 years ago. I was in my office. I had a lot on my plate. It was not a good time in many ways. And I get this phone call saying, "Hey, could you run some data for a voting rights case in Montana?" And I thought, well, shit, you know, the semester's about to start. I didn't just swear, did I? Okay, forgive me. But I thought, oh, well, yeah, I can run some numbers. It's not a big deal. So I said, okay, sure. I'm not the super quant type. Some of my colleagues right here are better than me, but I figured I could do this. 3 days later, I get a call back saying, "You know, that means you're going to be the expert witness in this voting rights case, and you have 1 month to put together an expert witness report." I had never even seen an expert witness report, much less put one together. And that was my introduction to 4 directions. So the moral of the story, my friends, if the phone rings, don't answer it, because otherwise your life may be destroyed. It will never be the same. Thank you, OJ. And of course, I foolishly started because I couldn't do this stuff. I mean, like, I'm one person, so you pull in all these other people, and that's what we've been doing for the last almost 11 years now. But blame Darren Marquez. If you know Darren, Tell him, you blew it, guy. But my topic for today was, you know, probably the least sexy of the ones that have been up here. So I figured I could do the dull one, and you guys can leave early if you wish, which is about state courts. The United States Constitution, Article 1, Section 4, yes, you got to listen to this, gives state legislators most of the control, most of the power over elections. They can determine the times, this is a quote, times, places, and manner of holding elections, states. This means that state laws and practices determine for most of us how easy or how hard it is to vote and the weight that your vote has. We're in Wisconsin. You all have a lot more vote, counts for a lot more weight than mine in California, let me tell you. But even though the states are so crucial, most voting rights cases have been argued as violations of federal law, the Voting Rights Act, or the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. And the good news is that for more than a half century, that approach generally worked. Not perfectly, but it was pretty good. But now we have a different Supreme Court. This particular court, and this is where I'm going to get in more trouble. I could swear, but I'll try not to swear again. This Supreme Court, in my view, is trying its very best to reverse decades of progress, turn us back, maybe if we're lucky, only to the 1940s or 50s, maybe all the way back to the 1880s, but that's my little side editorial. Think, for example, let me give you a couple examples. In 2013, the Supreme Court, a famous case, Shelby County v. Holder, for all intents and purposes, gutted the Voting Rights Act. They eliminated Section 5's requirement that states and political jurisdictions with significant histories of voting discrimination had to get the Department of Justice approval before implementing new voting requirements to make sure they're not discriminatory. This mattered for African Americans, it has mattered for Latinos, and yes, it has mattered in Indian country. Since this ruling, they said this ruling discriminated against the equal sovereignty of states, and it opened the floodgate, an absolute floodgate of states adopting and passing laws, literally hundreds of laws that made it harder for people to vote. Strict regulations, registration and voter ID laws, closing polling places, particularly in heavily Black and Latino neighborhoods, banning out-of-precinct voting, ballot collection, things that disproportionately affect Native people. And most recently, and it's not gotten enough attention, is allowing and creating pathways for so-called citizen groups to challenge anyone's voting registration. Your neighbor doesn't like you. He or she can go to the registrar and say, I don't think that person next door is an actual citizen. They might not be allowed to vote. Or maybe that person is a felon and shouldn't be voting. Surprise, surprise, most of these efforts to remove people from the rolls have occurred in heavily non-white districts. It doesn't happen where I live. I live in a mostly white university community, not subject to these kinds of actions. But that was the 2013 law. So take the VRA in many ways off the table. Unbelievably important federal law. But we still have the Equal Protection Act. Well, we did. In 2024, this year, the Supreme Court, in a case called Alexander v. South Carolina NAACP, issued a ruling that might even be worse. The South Carolina legislature had moved 200,000 people into new districts following the 2020 census. And what they did was they packed all the black voters into a single district. They didn't want to have two heavily black districts. And that allowed them to have one black district and 6 white districts. Now, the NAACP quite reasonably said, this discriminates against black voters. So they go to court. They took it to court. The NAACP's knowing that you're not going to win with a VRA case, they argued it as primarily an equal protection case. Well, the state legislature, which was Republican-controlled and white largely, said, no, 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 we didn't put this in place to discriminate against black voters. We did it because we don't like Democrats. Our intent was partisan, not racist. Well, what did the Supreme Court do? They said, well, we will accept the word of the state legislatures that it was partisan and not racial animus. And if it's a political question, then it is, quote, non-justiciable. Non-justiciable. That is a fancy legal term that when I first read it, I had to practice saying it so I could say it without going, non-justiciable. And what it means is the court has decided they will not issue a ruling on this issue. Now, and that it should be handled at either the state court level or handled by a state legislature. And they went back and drew up, reaching this, a case from 1847. Remember when I said this court is looking backwards? 1847. Now, those of you who are here and live in Wisconsin are probably familiar and it may have heard of the political question doctrine in the past. Why? That is one of the issues that the Supreme Court used to allow a massive political gerrymander done in Wisconsin following the 2010 census. And it created a massive Republican advantage in the legislature, which stayed intact, even though the Democratic share vote after that was generally higher than the Republican vote share over the next decade. But the statewide voting, you could elect a Democratic governor, you might even elect a new Supreme Court judge that is not conservative, but the state legislature stayed firmly, overwhelmingly controlled by Republicans, and it was a political question. Well, after 2020, the state legislature here was faced with a problem. That redistricting that they had done in 2010 had worked really well, but it looked like there were getting to be more Democrats, and people had moved around some. So they came up with a new plan, which was unbelievable. You guys probably have seen it here in Wisconsin. The districts, they looked like Swiss cheese. So you would have a district, and there would be these holes, and some of those holes would go into different districts. So what did people do? Well, instead of going to federal court, because folks had learned that this was not very successful, they went to state court, arguing in this case, in Wisconsin, that the redistricting in 2020 violated Wisconsin's redistricting law that said political districts, the districts were to be contiguous, i.e. connected. You know, you don't have Swiss cheese. and that they should be compact. And they won. They won in state court. And this highlights the importance of state laws. And I would argue that there are two broad categories that people need to know about with respect to voting rights and state laws. I mean, one of them is the laws that I referred to now that deal with what a state has to do when it redistricts. So that's one of them. The second piece is whether your state has a constitutional provision that gives voters rights that have to be fulfilled in running elections. I'll come back to it in a minute, the second one. But please note, these laws vary across states. So somebody can live in one state and have a whole series of rights, and the adjacent state, none of it. So please note, state laws matter. You're a US citizen, you're also a state citizen, and many people here are also citizens of native nations. So you can have multiple citizenships with different rights and responsibilities. Okay, so I mentioned first redistricting criteria because of the Wisconsin case. Well, that's the compactness and the continuity, which were important here in Wisconsin, but they also have things like preservation of political boundaries, preservation of communities of interest, prohibition on political favoritism, prohibitions on the use of partisan data, and a requirement that redistricting enhance competitiveness. Now, not every state has every one, so it's a mix. You've got to look them up. I want to point out, though, Utah, they just recently used one of these laws in the state of Utah to overcome another massive political gerrymander, so in Utah. But potentially even more important than the state laws dealing with redistricting are what are called free and equal clauses. Free and equal clauses that are in state constitutions. I mean, the exact wording varies across constitutions, but the clauses say that citizens within that state have a right to some mix of the following three things: free elections or free suffrage, that elections will be equal or open, and third, that elections will be free from outside influence. Now, these rights go well beyond any of the voting rights in the US Constitution. But here's what you need to know. Only 31 states have what are called free and equal clauses. So here's the good and the bad news. The bad news is that most southern states, surprise, surprise, the ones with the worst history of anti-Black voting rights abuses, do not have free and equal clauses in their constitutions. Good news is that many of the states in the West with large Native populations have these clauses. Unfortunately, guys, most of the Midwestern states, kind of mix. They're not as bad in general in the Midwest as the South, but not as good as in the West. So they are less common in the Midwest. Wisconsin, Minnesota, North Dakota, Iowa, and Michigan do not have free and equal clauses. That's the other bad news. So do we give up? Say we're done? Okay, we're screwed here in Wisconsin. No. Constitutions can be amended. Nevada in 2019 added language to its constitution that, quote, that mandated, quote, equal access without discrimination to the electoral system. Equal access without discrimination. This is a variant of a free and equal clause. And what happened? Well, in 2022, lawyers working with tribal governments have filed lawsuits in state courts using those clauses to try to get equal access for Native voters. This really didn't start until 2022, leading up to the 2022 election. The Shoshone and the Paiute on the Duck Valley Reservation in northeastern Nevada had tried for many years to get the county, Elko County, to open early voting and a polling place on the reservation. They had to travel 200 miles round trip to vote. The county kept saying no. Well, after this constitutional amendment was in place, they had an opportunity to challenge Elko County. So they went to court in Elko County, went to state court using the new constitutional provision with a pro bono attorney hired or brought in by 4 Directions, and got a settlement that gave them equal access, full access starting with 2024, improvement in 2022. But also in 2022, lawyers from NARF working with a group of Montana tribes, the Blackfeet, Confederated Salish and Kootenai, Flathead, Fort Belknap, and Northern Cheyenne used the free and equal clause in their state constitution to argue that new state laws banning ballot collection were unconstitutional. They won in lower state court, district court, and then got in early 2024 a ruling that affirmed this from the state Supreme Court, and part of the opinion said that the new laws made it, quote, much more difficult on average for people living on reservations to either get to a polling place on or before Election Day or to mail in an absentee ballot prior to Election Day. So they won. Right now, this issue is being fought over on Fort Peck, also again in Montana. So the basic takeaway is twofold. One, if your state constitution has a free and equal clause, use it to fight for equal voting access and rights. Two, if it doesn't, launch a friggin' campaign to get one added. And this is politically hard for politicians to argue against, because do you want to go on record saying you're opposed to free and equal access to voting, that you want to publicly state, I want unequal? Hard to pull off. So the fact that this law was passed in Nevada is evidence, and the recent law that dealt with redistricting in Utah. Utah ain't exactly a bastion of liberalism. So good luck, folks. And I'll pass the magic mic.
Magic Mike, it's now called Magic Ed. but we're able to show the inequality using this data, contacting them. And it's the first type of study, right? Ever. And it's done for Indian country. We have been able to work with these fine people here for years now, gathering information specifically for Indian country. It's never been done before. And what we're looking at right now, the MOVE project, what that does is we're going to have every state, and we're going to know what the equality is. In some cases, it's not just natives. I mean, a lot of times it's all people of color. And so this gives us a guide of what we're facing, what needs to be done, and how we need to change things, or to take and how we need to go over it, through it, or around it. So, I mean, the work they're doing is very, very important. And if you just each take a minute, if you can tell what, where you're a professor at, or where you're going to school at, double undergrad? No.
I'm a second-year PhD student at Claremont Graduate University. I'm an assistant professor at Towson University and also a graduate of Claremont University.
I'm an assistant professor at the University of Arizona.
I'm an emeritus professor at Claremont Graduate University, and in 2020, I was the expert witness in Yazzie Hobbs, and with the pandemic and classes online, I realized I couldn't do my justice to the court case and do my academic job, so I retired. So this is what I do now. Yeah.
But all of this is really important, and you know, they were talking about that. We're constantly looking for funding to ensure that the work they do is, you know, can be funded, because this is so important. And again, a lot of people may not get it, but if you're getting into getting our people to vote, and you're trying to get them into those polls, we're going to have a roadmap of where we're going to have the most difficult time and where we have to invest more time. We're going to have a roadmap of where we're going to have some type of equality, so that we can focus there and get our people to vote. But it all comes down to us having a bigger picture of the overall thing, and that's what they're doing. So what I would like to do is give them a round of applause and thank you. Any questions before we go? Sure. Hold on. Hold on, Rick. You know I'm slow. Yeah, this is my running mode.
I'm Levi Rickert, publisher, editor of Native News Online. I'm based in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I have enjoyed this forum. I've been here since Thursday. And kudos to OJ and his staff for putting this on. My comment is, and I heard the panel, somebody discuss the fact that in certain states you cannot vote if you're a felon. But yet I just want to point out, and certainly for the people online, that in the United States, we can elect a president who is a felon. So when you make your decision to vote, you really need to really think about that. It's just wrong. So I'm not sure who could change that. I think it's in the Constitution, isn't that right? So I'm not sure how you change the Constitution at this point, but I think that people really need to be aware of that. And anyone who paid close attention to the court case in New York, it was not fabricated, it was well argued, and he is a felon. So, thank you.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Schroeder,
Any other questions? See, my sister all the way in the back. She's not gonna ask anything. She's gonna wait till I get there. Oh, I can't remember.
I waited till you were up in the front before I raised my hand. I just wanted to make the comment, just where, when you had that hearing and they said, well, no, it wasn't racist. We just, wanted to, it was a political party, and that was okay, right? That there wasn't any follow-up related to that.
They went and cited a Supreme Court decision from I believe it was the 1847, there's lawyers here. Hello, lawyer.
No, he's hiding,
He's
getting
hiding.
coffee.
John is hiding there. The Luther case, yeah, I'm not a lawyer, but it was, I believe, an 1847 case that said some issues that come before a court are political questions that are not appropriate for the court to determine. Now, all of us know a large chunk of what comes before the court is political, so they pick and choose when they want to cite the political question doctrine. And think about it. Okay, partisan redistricting and things that screw people for partisan reasons that are political are okay, and now we don't have the VRA very effective anymore. I mean, wow. Sorry, I'm editorializing.
Can I ask a question that isn't academic? Now, do any of you have any data about an Indian country, whether it be specific tribes or states, regions? We have a lot of our people are felons, and they won't be able to vote even if they wanted to. Do you have any information about that? Because that's something that's often overlooked when we, every election cycle, and you want our community to vote, come out in droves, but a lot of people can't because they're felons.
I'm going to defer to our experts, and her name is on some of the research, so I think her or Dr. Dietrich would probably be best.
I'm so lucky. We are in the midst of collecting for the first time data on felony disenfranchisement, how much it is affecting Native communities. No one has done that before. We do have data showing that states with large Native populations have, and that also are ones with these harsh felon disenfranchisement laws, have extremely high rates of incarceration for Native people. But we're trying to, for the first time, pull that data together. It's like all of this data stuff. I don't mean to complain, but it's hard. And what makes things with Native people even more difficult, because I've done some on police use of lethal force against communities, and what I discovered is Native people, unless your name is something like John Running Bear, you are often misidentified in records as being either white, or if your last name is something like Garcia or Darren Marquez, you will be miscategorized as Latino. So getting this data that is solid, that we can count on, is much more difficult for Native communities than any of the other communities that people collect this kind of data. We're working on it. Yeah, Joe.
It also is an issue too of, as Edward was talking about, the jurisdictional question is federal, state, tribal, a mix, whatever. Just understanding that is the first knot that we're trying to untie
Okay, so I just wanted to add on to that. That's why I think the whole idea of decarceration and less punitive methods within Indian country, it can add on to or complement this whole idea about empowering people to vote is if you keep addressing the felony disenfranchisement as well. That makes any sense?
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Wendy Helgamo, and I'm going to be doing voter protection in Wisconsin in 2.5 weeks. So we've just received the training and, manuals and things like that for voter protection. And so I just wanted to tell you what the situation is in Wisconsin. The felonies can be a disqualification from an individual from voting. So if they're currently in prison on a felony conviction, that is a disqualification. Someone who is still on parole, probation, or extended supervision, or on paper is the lingo. But once they are off paper, civil rights, including the right to vote, are automatically restored. But the person must re-register to vote. And the polling places should have lists of ineligible voters, and that's provided by the Department of Corrections. And so if people have a question, they should see if they are on that list. If they also have a question, they should not vote because they could potentially be committing another felony. So there are a couple of extra steps that are going to have to happen. But people should try to vote if they can and just make sure if they're not on those lists.
Any other questions? And again, when I was up there talking, this is why it's really important. And I tease these guys a lot. I always say, being a native, living on a reservation, we know what they're doing. But we have to have a smart white person come in and tell them what we already know. So, and that's what's going on here is digging deep into the data to prove we know what we know. But it's necessary. It's necessary in order to win court cases and to ensure that our people have equality. And I'm really proud and honored to be a part of Four Directions and have such devoted professionals looking out for our interests. They get nothing out of this. I mean, we've actually changed their lives in which they have dedicated themselves to improving our lives. So, we're ending it now. So with that, I want to thank you once again, and you all have a great day.